I'm very, very proud to present the next speaker who came all the way from the West Coast to talk about his topic. John Sheridan, a rising star, as I would say, in Anabaptist studies, is here with us today. And he just finished his PhD this year. This has been a long process. He calls himself an ethnographer, and we cannot wait to hear what he has to tell us.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. This is such a wonderful gathering of people interested in Hutterites. This is just amazing. So I'm John Sheridan, and I'm going to just go ahead and jump right into this. So I'm going to give you some information that probably a lot of you already know, but I'll be inclusive, and in case anyone doesn't know this, here it is. So the Hutterites are an Anabaptist communal group in North America that began in 1528, and they immigrated to the Dakota Territories in the 1870s. Both scholarly and popular depictions of the Hutterites tend to paint Hutterites as monolithic, isolated people that cling to that cling to this, this static faith, this static Anabaptist and rigid faith. However, my over 10 years of collecting ethnographic field notes, hundreds of interviews, and visits to and overnight stays at 40 Hutterite colonies says otherwise, or at least, has a more complicated picture. So first, I want to discuss just a little bit of the background of Hutterites, some of the well-known ways Hutterites are diverse. And then second, I want to highlight the ways that Hutterites are religiously diverse by explaining the differences and disagreements between what I call the hardliner Hutterites and the evangelical Hutterites. And so some of the background here for Hutterites, there are over 500 colonies in North America, averaging, 75 to 150 members. And today there are almost 60,000 Hutterites, and they're still growing. They're doing quite well, actually. There are four different Loit or denominations, the Lara Loit, the Darius Loit, Shemitah Loit 1, Shemitah Loit 2. They practice a separation from the world, from the carnal world. So they live in colonies. And in these colonies, they practice something called community of goods. So this is where they hold all their goods in common. No one is directly paid for their work, yet everybody works really hard for the common good. Um, so let me go to the next slide. So if we look at sort of the Hutterite background and the ways that they are diverse, one thing that comes up is sort of their different economic practices. Hutterites have sort of mastered a lot of different economic practices, and they've done this on something called a colony. So a Hutterite colony is kind of like a small town. There's a gas station, a mechanic shop, a carpentry shop, there's a school, a church, a communal dining hall. There's so many different things. And what's really interesting is Hutterites are so incredibly self-sufficient, they build almost all of the buildings that exist on a Hutterite colony. They have their own community garden where they grow their own fruits and vegetables. They have their own livestock. So if you're eating in a Hutterite colony, pretty much everything on your plate, including the milk, the butter, the bread, the main dish, everything comes from the colony. Just incredibly self-sufficient. And so they are heavily mechanized, unlike the Amish. They totally embrace, sort of technology for economic benefit. And so Hutterites produce 90% of Montana's hogs in the US, 95% of its eggs, 80 to 85% of Alberta's eggs, 60% of South Dakota's hogs, and are large contributors to the $7.4 billion potato industry in Washington state. So they are a very small population, but have a very large contribution to the economy. And something else to note about them is their communal success is just incredible. So most communal groups in the US historically last 5 to 10 years tops. It's very hard to live in community. Hutterites, on the other hand, have existed for 500 years. So they've really mastered something here. There's something really unique and impressive, how they're so self-sufficient and so good at living communally. So what I want to focus on is sort of this division that I've noticed within Hutterites. So when we take a closer look, the religion of these two groups that I'm calling one, the hardliner Hutterites and the evangelical Hutterites, it starts to look a little bit different. So a lot of scholars have focused on kind of creating a homogeneous picture of Hutterite religion and focused a lot on text. But when I actually go and do the field work, I find something quite different. So just starting here with the hardliner Hutterites. So if you look on the picture on the left here, this is a hardliner Hutterite. He's wearing black. Black is a very important color for hardliner Hutterites. It's a humble color. The darker the colors generally, darker blues, darker greens, darker browns, those are more humble colors. Bright colors wouldn't really be okay in a hardliner colony. Um, and so his focus would be obedience, right? So it's a core value for the hardliner Hutterites. And so he's sort of representing that with this style of dress. On the other side here, you have a photo of it's a robot that pushes hay and feed towards the cows. And I don't know if you can all see it. It's maybe a little blurred here, but it says there's a cross written in dust and it says, Jesus is King, repent. So this is sort of representative of the evangelical values. They use the word Jesus a lot. They talk about repentance, which implies some kind of individual relationship with God, something that wouldn't really be emphasized in a hardliner colony. So number one here, faith without works is dead. This is something that a lot of hardliner Hutterites would say. And they're saying it in opposition to the evangelical Hutterites. So what they're saying is, if you want to know if someone's a good Christian, look at their works. Look at what they're doing in a colony. You look at, look at how they're acting. What are they actually doing? What are they contributing? Are they just talking on and on about Jesus or, professing their faith, or are they actually contributing to the colony? On the other hand, you have the evangelical Hutterites who say works without faith is dead. They say you need to have Jesus in your heart. You need to be guided by the Spirit. And having that faith is what causes you to do good works. So there's this tension here. There's this emphasis, one on works as sort of this leading important factor, and one on faith as this really important factor. Another difference, we can go to number two here. For hardliner Hutterites, they say, they're a light to the world. What they mean by that is they're an example for the world to see. So they live the best Christian life they can. They take care of their neighbor. When they walk through town, people notice their style of dress and will pull them over and be like, who are you? And they love that because that's an opportunity for them to tell people about their faith. And to them, that's enough for evangelizing. They don't go out into the world and try to get converts. They believe that they're an example for the world. Evangelical Hutterites, on the other hand, openly evangelize. They'll evangelize to hardliner Hutterites, to guests, to each other. They'll talk about the born again experience. They'll talk about sort of their sins and confess their sins. They really emphasize evangelizing. There's something really valuable to them about this. Some of them want to even form colonies for outsiders to join and to kind of teach them the Hutterite way. They feel like they're not doing enough being isolated in their colonies. Going to number three here, the outer reflects the inner. For the hardliner Hutterites, the idea of dress is very important. It's not to say that it's not important for evangelical Hutterites, but dress is so important for hardliner Hutterites. So for the hardliner Hutterites, the men would wear black pants with straight pockets, not rounded, not store-bought. They wouldn't have any back pockets. They would wear long sleeve shirts And there would be absolutely never be a pocket like this on their shirt. No way. That would be such a bad thing to them. And their jackets would have hooks and eyes. It wouldn't have buttons or snaps. Snaps would absolutely be a no. And so for evangelical Hutterites, they would maybe have, short sleeve shirts. The men would have pockets. They may have store-bought pants or rounded pockets. They might have back pockets. And this all maybe seems insignificant, but I'm going to sort of build to this and explain why this really matters. So for this idea that this emphasis on dress and work for the hardliner Hutterites, um, that's how you know that they are good Christians. That's how you know that they are being obedient. Obedience is paramount for them. For the evangelical Hutterites, the inner reflects the outer. So you have Jesus in your heart, you're born again, and that's what leads you to do the good works. That is, you develop this conscience that causes you to do the good works. Number 4, submissive obedience to the colony. So hardliner Hutterites hold that Hutterite needs to submit and be obedient to the authority and emphasizes sort of a collective, like a collective religion. So giving you an example here, if someone sins, they'll go to the minister, they'll confess their sins, then the minister will, bring this to the congregation. The congregation will then pray to God, and then the idea is they'll ask for forgiveness, and those sins can be absolved. So this is all done through the community, through sort of the proper channels of authority. The minister sort of being the top authority in a Hutterite colony. In a evangelical colony, so it's submissive obedience to God. So Hutterites form an individual relationship with God. They pray to God individually. They engage in, confessing their sins and asking for forgiveness. And for the hardliner Hutterites, this can seem sort of like sidestepping authority, not going through the proper channels. And this is a big debate among Hutterites. Evangelical Hutterites might still confess their sins to a minister, but they're also engaging in this practice. Number 5 here, so the new birth guided by the colony for hardliner Hutterites. So hardliner Hutterites often refer to being born again as the new birth. They are born again as well, but it's not something that they tend to emphasize. The idea is that the colony is set up with certain rules and regulations to keep you from sinning. So for instance, breakfast is at 7 a.m. sharp. And hardliner Hutterites really emphasize getting to breakfast on time. Your hair is going to be parted because that's the right way to have your hair. If you're a man, you're going to be dressed with your suspenders on and all of your garb going to be ready to go and be there at 7. All of this rigidity and these rules, that keeps you in line. For the born-again Hutterites, they believe that it starts with, internally. You're born again. You have this, the Spirit in your heart. You are guided by the Spirit. And that is what sort of produces colony life. That is what gives, what allows for colony life to function. So what's really important here is for the hardliner Hutterites, they see a colony as necessary for salvation. You have to live in a Hutterite colony in order to be saved. And born-again Hutterites, on the other hand, see a colony as a very good way to live a Christian life. You have your neighbors there that you can help and they can help you. You're not in the outside world where that kind of forces you to be more selfish and individualistic. So it's the best way to live a good Christian life. It's not the only way. There are other Christians. There are other people who are going to make it to heaven. But for the hardliner Hutterites, that's not the case. So you have a really important theological difference here for what a colony actually is and what it means to these two groups, even though they're both Hutterites. And so just to sort of drive all of this home, I was talking to a hardliner Hutterite in his living room, and hardliner Hutterites, it's not just about their dress. Their their walls are bare. They don't allow for pictures to be taken because that would be idolatry. It'd be idolatry to hang anything up on their walls. All of their furniture, their beds, their couches and chairs, they're made in the colony. And they all are kind of rigid and stiff. They're not super comfortable. So, if you go to an evangelical colony, there's lots of flowers, there's decorations. They tend to buy their furniture off of the colony, so you get sort of more cushiony furniture. And there's just a lot more items in their home. But so I was talking to this hardliner Hutterite, and I asked him, "So what would you do if you saw an evangelical Hutterite in town walking down the street with his, short sleeve shirt, his pocket on his shirt, his rounded pants? What would you do?" And he said, "I'd go up to him, I'd give him a hug and a kiss, I'd tell him I love him, but I wouldn't shake his hand because that would mean we are of one heart and one mind, and we are not. I tell him that because he's got that pocket on his shirt, he's being disobedient to the church, which is ordained by God, and therefore he's being disobedient to God, which means he's going to hell." And he said this very sternly, very seriously. And so this is, he's talking about another Hutterite. And so this was pretty profound because as an outsider, you maybe think, well, Hutterites sort of dress pretty similarly. There can't be that big of difference. How important could this be? But the ramifications for this Hutterite were incredibly severe. That certain Hutterites are going to hell because of the way they dress, because of their disobedience. So I'm not here to take sides. I have good friends in the hardliner Hutterite colonies. I have good friends in the evangelical Hutterite colonies. And it's important to note that these two categories do not encompass all Hutterites. There's actually a lot more diversity that I want to uncover about Hutterite religion. You can sort of think of it this way. There's sort of costs and benefits to both of their ways of living. So for hardliner Hutterites, having a more sort of rigid, closed mind helps maybe to protect their youth a bit. They don't let in as much technology. They focus a lot on obedience, making sure people are obeying. The Hutterites that I have witnessed are very into their religion and way of life. They are working hard for the community. They are true believers. But at the same time, there is this rigidity might be causing them to alienate some other Hutterites, some of their brethren. And so that could be a cost. So there's Hutterites that live right next to each other that never interact because they're hardliners and evangelicals. They don't do business together. They don't visit. And you can tell by, the story I just told, how serious this debate is. I was also really shocked on the hardliners' perspective on Shmita 1. They don't associate with Shmita 1. Evangelical Hutterites tend to, they'll do business with Shmita 1. They'll have them over, they'll visit, but hardliner Hutterites don't. So that could be a cost. On the other hand, for evangelical Hutterites, there's maybe this benefit of having sort of, the young people are getting together in the evening. They're reading the Bible in English. They're very passionate about what they're talking about their faith. They're bonding over sort of sin and repentance. There's a lot of benefits there. A lot of social and maybe even mental health benefits. However, maybe the cost could be that they are, things are changing very quickly for them. They're a lot more open to the outside world, and that can have a cost to it. So overall, though, I think what's really interesting is this demonstrates that Hutterites are not so fragile that if you just change one thing, they all fall apart. scholars have really pointed to the importance of Hutterite religion as being part of their overall communal success. But I wonder sort of how that squares with their diversity. We're seeing that, there's multiple paths to success and longevity, which I just find very interesting as a scholar. So that is my presentation. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.